He had reserved a seat for her at the back of the room, not in the family section near the front, not among the colleagues who had known both of them during the years they built the company together, but at the back, near the service entrance, at a table that seated 10 and had been assigned to people whose names he had trouble remembering between meetings. He had done it deliberately, the way a man does something deliberately when he wants to call it an accident if anyone asks. Terence Hollis had been planning this evening for 7 months. The gala was called a celebration. 10 years of Hollis digital solutions, printed on the invitations in raised gold lettering on cream cardstock, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. He had chosen the venue himself, a converted heritage building on King Street West in Toronto. The kind of space with exposed brick and vaulted ceilings that photographers loved and that made everything inside it look important. He had approved the menu, the florals, the lighting design. He had stood in this room 3 weeks before the event with his events coordinator and pointed to the center of the space and said, "This is where I want people to look when they walk in." What he wanted them to see when they walked in was him. And somewhere at the back, near the kitchen doors, he wanted them to see Amara. Her name was Amara Osei-Bonsu, and she had not needed the invitation to know about the gala. She had heard about it through the kind of informal network that exists in every industry. The assistant who mentioned it to a former colleague, the LinkedIn post from someone on Terence's PR team. The quiet ripple of information that moves through a city like Toronto, the way water moves through old pipes, finding every crack and gap before you notice it is already on the other side. She had known about it for 4 months before the envelope arrived at her office on the 14th floor of a glass tower on Bay Street, addressed not to the name most people in her industry now used, but to the name Terence had known her by, the name from before, Amara Hollis. She had not used that name in 3 years. Her assistant had set the envelope on her desk without comment, which was the kind of professional discretion Amara paid well for and appreciated deeply. She had looked at it for a long moment before she opened it. The cardstock was heavy. The gold lettering caught the light from the window that looked out over the lake. At the bottom, in smaller print, someone had handwritten, "We hope you'll join us." T. She had placed it flat on her desk and called her next meeting in early. That night, sitting at the kitchen island in her house in Rosedale, with a cup of tea she forgot to drink, she turned the invitation over in her hands and thought about the 7 years she had spent building something she no longer had her name on. She thought about the early years, the apartment in Scarborough, with the secondhand desk, Dees, where she had written the first version of the algorithm that would eventually become the core of Hollis Digital's flagship product. She thought about her mother, who had come to Canada from Accra with 2 suitcases and a nursing degree, and who had worked overnight shifts at Sunnybrook so that Amara could attend a university where nobody looked like either of them. She thought about what it had cost, not in money but in the other currency that does not appear on any balance sheet. Then she set the invitation on the counter and went to bed. She did not decide, that night, whether she would go. Terence had told his fiancée, a woman named Sloane, that the invitation to Amara was a gesture of maturity. "It shows the people in this industry that I have no hard feelings," he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror of their condo on Bloor. "It's the professional thing to do." Sloane was 29 and had met Terence at a conference in Vancouver 14 months ago, when she was working as a brand strategist for a firm that had since hired her away to become a partner. She was not naive. She had heard enough about Amara, from Terence's version of events, which she understood to be his version, to know that the invitation was not entirely about maturity. "You want her to see what she gave up," Sloane said, without looking away from her own reflection. Terence laughed, the way people laugh when someone has said something accurate that they plan to deny. "I want her to see what we built." Sloane did not say anything further. She smoothed the front of her dress and picked up her clutch and thought, not for the first time, that there was something in the way Terence said, "We built," that depended on who was in the room. Amara decided to attend on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 weeks before the gala, she made the decision the way she made most decisions, without drama, after a period of quiet consideration that other people sometimes mistook for hesitation. She called her EA, a composed young man named Fletcher, who had been with her for 2 years, and who never asked unnecessary questions, and told him to confirm her attendance. Then she called her stylist. Then she called her board chair. The board chair's name was Dr. Fiona Chukwu, a woman in her late 60s who had spent 30 years in venture capital and who had been one of the first people in Toronto's tech ecosystem to take a meeting with Amara after the divorce, when the industry was still watching to see which way the narrative would fall. Fiona had looked at Amara's business plan for 40 minutes and then said, without preamble, "This is the best thing I've read in 5 years, and I've read a lot of things." "He invited me to the gala," Amara said. A pause, then Fiona said, "And you're going." It was not a question. "I'm going," Amara said. Another pause, shorter this time. "You know the Meridian Summit is the same night." Amara knew. The Meridian Summit was the annual gathering of Canada's most significant technology investors, a by-invitation-only event that had been held every year for a decade in venues that rotated between Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. This year it was in Toronto, at a hotel 6 blocks from Hollis Digital's Gala. Amara had been invited to speak on the main stage at 8 o'clock. She had been invited 3 months ago, before she knew about the gala's date, and she had accepted without thinking about any possible conflict. "I'll attend his event at 7, she said, "and be at Meridian by 8:15. Fiona was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Wear something they'll remember." She arrived at the gala at 7:12. Fletcher had arranged a car, a black SUV, that pulled up to the King Street entrance with the quiet efficiency of something that did not need to announce itself. The driver opened the door and Amara stepped out onto the sidewalk, wearing a floor-length gown in deep burgundy that her stylist had sourced from a Toronto designer who was not yet well known, but would be, because that was the kind of eye Amara had always had for things that were about to matter. Around her neck was a single piece, a gold collar architectural in its simplicity. The kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a museum, but chose instead to be here, on her, tonight. She did not have bodyguards. She did not need them. What she had was composure, which in certain rooms is more commanding than anything else. The people near the entrance, a cluster of guests holding glasses of sparkling wine, 2 photographers from a tech industry publication, a woman in a headset from the events team, registered her arrival in different ways. The photographers raised their cameras. The woman in the headset went very still for a moment, then turned and said something quietly into the device curved at her jaw. Amara walked through the doors. Terence was standing near the bar when she entered, talking to a man who ran a mid-sized logistics company and who laughed at everything, Terence said. He saw her from across the room. He had expected to feel, at this moment, the particular satisfaction of a man who has arranged a scene in his favor and is now watching it unfold. He had imagined this moment. Not consciously, not in the way he would ever admit, but in the way that people imagine things they tell themselves they are not thinking about. What he felt instead, when he saw her walk through those doors in that dress with that composure, was something that lived in the same neighborhood as alarm. He recovered quickly. He was good at recovering quickly. He crossed the room with the deliberate casualness of a man who wants to appear uncalculated, holding his champagne flute loosely at his side. "Amara," he said, "I'm glad you came." She looked at him with an expression that was entirely pleasant and revealed nothing beneath it. "Terence," she said, "congratulations on the decade." 10 years, he said, and he smiled the smile that worked in meetings with people who did not know him well. "A lot has changed." "Yes," she said simply, "it has." There was a pause, the kind that has weight to it, and then someone touched Terence's arm. His PR director, a man who always appeared at exactly the moment he was needed, and said that the AV team needed confirmation on the slide order for the presentation. Terence excused himself with a look at Amara that was meant to communicate something she was not particularly interested in receiving, and he walked away. Amara accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and made her way across the room. The seating card at the back table had her name on it, but she did not sit there. She did not make a scene about it, did not call attention to it, did not mention it to anyone. She simply moved through the room as she had always moved through rooms, noticing everything, reacting to very little visibly, and found herself in a conversation with three people she had not seen since before the divorce. A woman who ran the data governance team at a major Canadian bank, a man who had been one of Hollis Digital's first enterprise clients, and a research director from the University of Toronto's AI Institute whose name Amara knew because she had co-funded his lab 2 years ago, though he had not been told who the donor was. When he realized who she was, he stopped mid-sentence. "The Osei-Bonsu Fund," he said. "That's you." "That's me," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating the size of a room they thought they understood, and then he extended his hand and shook hers with both of his, and said, "There are things in our lab right now that would not exist without what you made possible." The woman from the bank had been listening. She turned to Amara with a careful, assessing look, the kind of look that belongs to someone who evaluates risk for a living, and said, "I didn't know you were involved in the institute." "I prefer to work quietly," Amara said. At 7:43, Terence took the microphone. The room gathered. The lights shifted. He stood at a podium near the center of the space. The exposed brick behind him, the chandelier above, the carefully curated crowd arranged in that way. Crowds arrange themselves around the person they've been told is the center. He was good at this. At the pause before he spoke, at the sense he conveyed of a man who had earned the right to stand in the middle of things. 10 years ago, he began, I had an idea. He told the story of Hollis Digital's founding the way he had told it many times, with the same beats and the same pauses and the same moment near the middle where he became briefly self-deprecating to signal his own likability. He talked about the early clients, the first round of funding, the product launch that had not gone smoothly and the pivot that had saved it. He used the word we several times in the general collective sense that means no one in particular. He did not say Amara's name, not once. In the room, several people noticed. The research director from the AI Institute noticed and looked briefly at Amara, who was standing near the bar with her water glass, listening with an expression that gave nothing away. The woman from the bank noticed, the logistics man, who had known Terence for years, and who had been one of the few people who ever asked Amara directly how the algorithm had come to exist, noticed, and his expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A subtle settling, the way a man settles when he sees something he expected to see. Sloane, standing at the edge of the room with her own champagne, also noticed. She had been watching Amara since she arrived. Not with hostility, with the careful attention of a woman who understands that there is more information available in a room than what is being said aloud. She had watched the way the research director reacted to Amara's name. She had watched the way the woman from the bank leaned in when Amara spoke. She had watched the room adjust its orientation, almost imperceptibly, toward a woman who was sitting at the back table near the kitchen doors, and yet somehow commanding more gravity than the man at the podium. When Terence finished speaking, the room applauded. Amara set down her glass and glanced at her watch. She left at 7:58. She did not seek out Terence before she left. She said goodbye to the research director, who pressed his card into her hand and said he hoped she would visit the lab sometime, that there was a project he would value her perspective on. She exchanged a brief word with the woman from the bank, who mentioned that her institution's innovation committee was looking for external advisors, and that she would be in touch. The logistics man, whose name was Gerald, and who had the manner of someone who says very little but means all of it, touched her elbow as she moved toward the exit and said, quietly, "It's good to see you doing well, genuinely." "Thank you, Gerald," she said. "It's good to be well." She walked out of the King Street entrance at 7:59 and into the black SUV that Fletcher had arranged to be waiting. The driver closed the door behind her. She set her clutch on the seat beside her and let out a breath that was not quite a sigh, and looked out the window at the city moving past. 6 blocks. The Meridian Summit was held in a hotel ballroom that had been transformed, for the evening, into the kind of space that communicates seriousness without sacrificing comfort. Long tables, low centerpieces, a stage at the front, with 2 screens flanking a single podium. There were 400 people in the room. Most of them had been in the industry for long enough to have heard of Amara Osei-Bonsu. A significant number of them had been waiting to see what she would do next, since the company she built had become, in the years after she left it, something that bore less and less resemblance to the thing she had built. She was introduced at 8:17 by the summit's host, a woman who ran one of the country's largest tech policy organizations, and who listed Amara's credentials in the measured tone of someone reading a document they find genuinely impressive. The Osei-Bonsu Fund, the AI Ethics Partnership with 3 Canadian universities, the advisory board positions, and, announced for the first time publicly, that night, the seed investment in a new company building privacy-first data infrastructure for the healthcare sector, a company that had just received its first major contract from a provincial government. The room absorbed this information. Amara walked to the podium. She did not begin with a joke, or a self-deprecating remark, or a quotation from someone more famous than herself. She began the way she had always begun things, directly. "I want to talk about what gets left out of the stories we tell about success," she said. "Not the difficulty. Everyone acknowledges the difficulty, because difficulty is a credential. I want to talk about the contributions that get quietly removed from the record once the success is confirmed." The room was very still. "I grew up in Scarborough," she said. "My mother worked nights so that I could attend a university where I spent 4 years being the only person who looked like me in every room I entered. I built the first version of what became a significant piece of technology on a secondhand desk in an apartment I was not sure I could keep paying for. And then I spent 7 years inside a company that carried someone else's name while I made the decisions that determined whether it would survive." She paused. "I am not here tonight to ask for credit. Credit, I have learned, has a way of finding its way to the surface, given enough time and enough light." Another pause, shorter. "I am here because there are people in this room who are building things right now, quietly, in conditions that do not reward visibility, and I want them to know that the record is not fixed. The record is a living document, and anyone who tells you otherwise is hoping you won't check." The applause, when it came, was not the polite kind. Back on King Street, Terence was taking photographs with guests in front of the Hollis digital banner when his phone began to move, in the way a phone moves when multiple notifications arrive in rapid succession. He ignored it for the first few minutes, the way a man ignores a sound he has decided not to hear. Then his PR director appeared at his elbow again, and this time the expression on his face was different. "The Meridian Summit is live streaming," his PR director said quietly, close to his ear. "Amara's speaking." Terrence's smile did not change, outwardly, and the PR director chose his next words with the care of a man who has learned the value of precision. "A lot of the investors who sent regrets tonight are in that room. And what she's saying," he paused, "it's landing." Terrence turned slightly so that his face was no longer fully visible to the guests near the banner. "What is she saying?" "She's talking about the company, not by name, but people know." There was a pause that lasted several seconds, during which the band played something smooth, and the servers circulated with champagne, and the guests continued their conversations in the easy, expansive way of people who are enjoying themselves and do not know that the texture of the evening has changed. Then Terrence's phone buzzed once, directly, a message, not a notification, and he looked down at the screen. It was from Gerald, the logistics man, whose messages were always short. "She built that thing. Terrence. Everyone in that room knows it. You should have said her name." Terrence did not respond. He put the phone in his pocket. He joined the guests near the banner. He smiled the mile. But later, when the photographer asked him to look directly at the camera, he found, without fully understanding why, that he could not quite hold the expression he intended. Something behind his eyes was doing the arithmetic. Something behind his eyes was calculating the distance between the story he had told at the podium and the story that was, at this moment, being told 6 blocks away to 400 people who would remember it. Sloane left the gala at 9:15. She did not tell Terence she was leaving. She sent him a text that said simply tired, heading home, which was not entirely untrue, though the tiredness was not physical. She rode in the back of a car across the city, with her phone in her hand, and pulled up the Meridian Summit stream, which was still running, and watched the last few minutes of Amara's remarks, and then the Q&A that followed, in which a young woman near the front of the room asked Amara what she would tell someone who was watching their contributions go uncredited in real time. Amara had looked at her for a moment before answering, with the kind of directness that does not perform warmth but is genuinely kind. "Document everything," she said. "Not for litigation, for yourself, so that you always know what you made, and no one else's version of the story can replace your own memory of it. The receipts are not for them, they are for you." Sloane watched the clip twice. Then she put her phone away and looked out the window and thought about several things she had been not thinking about for the past few months, and thought about them clearly, in sequence, the way a person thinks about things when they have run out of reasons not to. 6 weeks after the gala, a piece ran in a technology publication, not a large one, but a respected one, the kind with a small readership that had significant overlap with the people who made decisions in the Canadian tech sector. The piece was about the early history of Hollis Digital Solutions, and it contained interviews with 3 people who had been involved in the company's founding years. A former developer, the logistics man Gerald, and the research director from the AI Institute, who had made some calls in the days after the Meridian Summit. The piece contained a section about the algorithm, about who had written the first version, about the desk in Scarborough. It did not say Hollis Digital's name without also saying Amara Osei-Bonsu's. Terrence's communications team put out a statement calling the piece one-sided. The statement received less attention than the article. The article was shared 4,000 times in the first 24 hours. Amara did not share it herself. She did not comment on it publicly. When a journalist contacted Fletcher to ask if she wanted to respond, Fletcher replied with a single sentence: "Ms. Osei-Bonsu's work continues to speak for itself." On a Thursday morning in late November, Amara was sitting in a boardroom on Bay Street with 7 people who were there to discuss the second phase of funding for the healthcare data company. Outside the window, the lake was the color of pewter and moving in the way it moves when the temperature is about to change. Restless, slightly opaque, rearranging itself against the shore. One of the investors, a woman from Montreal who had been in the industry for 25 years and who had the manner of someone who has no remaining patience for theater, set her copy of the pitch deck on the table and said, "I read the piece in the publication. I saw that it ran," Amara said. "I've been in this business long enough to know that when someone's contribution has to be recovered from the record rather than given freely, it means the person did the work and someone else took the room." The woman from Montreal looked at her directly. "I don't like that. I've spent my career not liking that." A pause. "I want to lead this round," the woman from Montreal said, "and I want you on the advisory structure in a way that means something, not a name on a page." Amara looked at her for a moment. Outside the window, a bird moved low across the surface of the lake and banked left and disappeared behind the glass of the building across the street. The room held its quiet. "Let's talk about what that looks like," Amara said. The Osei-Bonsu name, by the end of that winter, had attached itself to things that did not require a press release to confirm their significance. A new research fellowship at a Toronto university, bearing her mother's name, a mentorship cohort for young women in technology who had grown up in Scarborough, Rexdale, Jane and Finch, Malvern. A keynote at a conference in Vancouver that was described by the people who attended it as one of the best things they had seen in years, not because of the production value, but because of the honesty, which is the thing that lingers after a room has emptied and the chairs have been stacked. She did not set out to be recognized. She had long since stopped building for recognition. Recognition was the thing that came looking for you when you had already done the work and moved on to the next thing, when you were too occupied to prepare a face for its arrival. The people who got stuck waiting for it, she had noticed, were the ones who had confused the applause for the point. Her mother came to Toronto in February, and they ate jollof rice at the Kitchen Island in Rosedale and talked until well past midnight, the way they talked when there was time and no performance required. Switching between English and Twi without noticing, the way you do when a language is not a language anymore, but a room you have always lived in. Her mother asked, at some point in the evening, whether Amara had heard anything from Terence. Amara thought about it for a moment. Not directly, she said. Her mother made the small sound she made when something was both unsurprising and unfortunate. Then she picked up her fork and said, "You built something real. The rest is detail." Amara looked at her, at the lines around her eyes that had come from the overnight shifts, at the steadiness of her hands that had come from years of doing difficult things, without being asked to account for the difficulty, and felt something settle in her chest, a quiet and solid thing, like a foundation confirming itself under weight. "Yes," she said, "it is." The city was cold outside and dark, and the lake was invisible from here, but she knew it was there. The way you know the things that have always been there, without needing to see them, without needing anyone else to confirm that they exist.